now, ladies and gentlemen, live from the Bellingham Center in Troy, Michigan, please welcome PCC Today, featuring Paul Brotz as our host. Let's give it up now for Mr. Paul Brotz.
Thank you. Thank you. Just so that Stephen's well aware, Thanksgiving will not be good for him or his team. Because we're going to take them apart. Because we have a team this year, maybe. Well, once again, thank you for everyone attending. This is the part of our show where we're going to introduce our industry panel. And we have some questions that the audience can give, and we have some other questions for these people. But I'd like to bring up the group and have them sit here. So first, I'd like to introduce Mr. Pat Bresser. Pat is the owner of Bresser's Information Systems. He's one of the largest political mailers in Detroit and is also a mail list expert. Welcome, Pat. Next, I'd like to bring up Mr. Tracy Evans. Tracy Evans is a consultant and a director vice president at Royal Alliances and is one of the foremost knowledgeable people that I know of in the industry. If I was doing the, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or Jeopardy, he's my first choice. I'm going with him. So now my second choice is my little buddy from TGI Direct. So Kevin Yost is the director at TGI Direct for their mail services. And then we have Pete Jackson, who is the president of Delivery Point Mail Services. Pete is the reigning expert in town on international mail, standard flats, bound print and matter, transportation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So welcome, everybody. To get started and to kind of break the ice a little, I'll start maybe with a question or two for one of them, and then we'll pass the microphone around for people who have questions. First, I'll start with Kevin. Question for you here, since you have the microphone. The Business Gateway is a great tool that the United States Postal Service uses, and one of the most innovative items they have, along with informed delivery and visibility and the other platforms that they have. Can you go over some of the key features and some of the ways that the businesses are using this to interact with the United States Postal Service?
Sure. The Business Customer Gateway, which I'm sure many of you have already been on. If not, you need to get on there, because all the things that we're hearing about today with informed visibility, informed delivery, especially if you're creating an informed delivery campaign, all of that information is accessed from where do you think? The Business Customer Gateway. So if you're a mail service provider and you need a mailer ID for your intelligent mail barcodes, you get that from the Business Customer Gateway. If you do remittance envelopes, courtesy reply, business reply, you have to go and get that information. You can get your artwork on there on the Business Customer Gateway. There are so many things as far as from not opening permits, but managing your permits. EPS, electronic payment systems. You can balance your permits and keep track of all your financial records with the Postal Service. Postal office boxes online. All of these things are built into the Business Customer Gateway. It's one place to where you can do all of your business with the Postal Service in one stop.
Thank you. This question is going to be for Pat Bresser. Pat, there was an interesting comment that Mr. Deering made about an upcoming election. And can you go over what people can expect to see in this election and then the infamous 2020 election?
This year has been much smaller than other years. We're in that cycle where we don't have the volume there's just not as many people in the election cycle, which has helped us out with family vacations. This is one of those years we actually get to take one. But next year, we're going to have just one of the largest we've had in years. The volume, people are tooling up with equipment. The post office is getting ready. You hear them talking about it. Should start probably November is where we're going to start seeing volumes really take off and just keep going from there on.
So I know that it's the time of the year that Deshaun Sims, our BMEU manager, kind of turns her hair gray, maybe. But grayer. But based on that, what are some of the things that people can do to kind of move their political mail through the system a little bit quicker? Are there some tricks to the trade that that can help do that, as opposed to waiting 7 to 10 days maybe to get their mail delivered?
Right. I know there's a lot of postal salespeople here that go out and actually start talking to political campaigns. We have, and this is our plug here for the PCC, but next April we're going to have an actual workshop, a webinar that you can have your candidates come and listen to. We'll go through step by step some ideas of how long print takes, how long the mail house takes, delivery, what they can expect from delivery. And actually, after hearing Mr. Deering's presentation, we are going to shape this a lot to inform delivery and inform visibility, because the technology is there. Most mailers already have it in place. It'll really help out the candidates with putting out people into the communities, knocking on doors, following mail pieces. It's always been a big question: when's my mail going to be delivered? So with that new technology, it should be a really fun time to be a mailer, because you won't have to answer the question. We can send them a link, and they open that link up and they see exactly who's getting their mail and when. So it should be a fun time there. A lot easier to answer the phone.
Let's go to Mr. Jackson next. So with regard to that, Pete, transportation's costs continue to increase. So as mailers may send their mail across the country, especially like for the political pieces and such, what are some of the ways that the Postal Service is helping to reduce these expenses of transportation for mailers? What are some of the ways that they're using today that are, that some people may not be aware of?
The Postal Service is trying to reduce costs as everyone's feeling a crunch in terms of transportation with drivers and logging hours, and there's just not enough drivers to fulfill the need. I know the post office is even, I remember at the Postal Forum, they're talking about ways to do load sharing. If there'd be a pilot program to be able to share load capacity, to be able to take pallets cross country, just to make sure that they're not sending out trucks that have extra spaces on them. There's a variety of shipping options, whether it's through the PMOD process for priority mail, open and distribute. That's a way to ship across country. There's different ways the post office you can actually, if you speak with the post office, there's different options, as well as in the industry, to be able to reduce your shipping expense.
Okay. To switch directions a little, and staying with you, it was announced that the Universal Postal Union has recently made a decision or the United States Postal Service has determined to stay with the Universal Postal Union. Can you kind of give a breakdown as to the value of that and why that's important?
Yeah, that was important just because, especially because over the last few years, it's been as e-commerce shipments have just exploded on the parcel side. There's been a huge rise in shipments coming in from overseas, especially from China, and the way the postage rates were structured for inbound, for international postage payment amongst the Universal Postal Union, the structure for how those rates were created was a pretty archaic formula based on economic conditions of the world countries. And China was kind of considered a developing nation, was able to pay a much lesser rate than what they really should be paying right now, to where they'd be paying costs to deliver e-commerce shipments from mainland China into the U.S. that'd be less than what you or I would ship domestically. If I'm paying $3.50 for a parcel select lightweight or $5.50 for a parcel select piece over a pound, and yet they're able to ship these packages from mainland China over here for less than for right around $1, we'll say. It's unfair competitive. It's an unfair advantage to the market. So it definitely needed to be adjusted. So for a variety of factors beyond that as well, it would have been a real struggle for the post office to be able to create new rates and implement a whole new barcoding process. There's definitely it would have been, to put that in play within, if they would have exited the postal union this quickly, it would have been a challenge to set new rates and put a structure in place to be able to get through customs through all these different countries as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Go next to Mr. Evans. So the post office has all these programs, and one of the ones that hasn't been discussed today is secure destruction. So secure destruction is a newer service, but how does this service work, and how do clients activate, or what's the value behind secure destruction versus just, say, the piece coming back to you?
Well, it's for first-class letters, and it is for undeliverable as addressed mail. And what a mailer does is go to the customer gateway and get a specific sign up for secure destruction and put a different STID on the mail piece. And when the post office gets that mail piece, they send the data back to the mailer and destroy the mail piece. So it saves on environmentally a lot instead of, and then the mailer does not have to deal with the return, which is a big savings for both the post office and the mailer.
Okay. Part of today's event is we wanted to kind of work with the Postal Service, because there's a lot of postal employees here today, and kind of understand where the industry sees the Postal Service at, and or how we view it. So hopefully a lot of these answers are in agreement with what you're thinking as the Postal Service. But one of the big kind of issues that I think there is in the public is how the post office is managing their funds. So, Mr. Evans, you know, the post office does take its hits from the media. It takes its fair share. But, you know, they have a 10-year business plan to put the Postal Service on a sustainable path. Can you elaborate on what that is? I mean, us as postal geeks, we'll say, yes, I'm a postal geek. Maybe don't, when we read the things in the newspaper that we see, we kind of maybe get a little defensive. So could you kind of elaborate on what the post office is trying to do to fix things?
Well, they haven't officially came out with their plan, but part of it that they're looking to do is to cut possibly the 6-day delivery from 6 to 5 for letters. The post office is in balancing customer needs and being cost efficient with being competitive at the same time. A couple other things they're looking to do is there's still more plants for the post office to close that they weren't able to do, a couple of years ago because of political reasons. The environment seems to be friendly to that. And then there's some opportunity that's some actually big dollars for the post office is retirees to move from their program to Medicare. And really that's just a paper loss, but it does help the post office. When you look about how much money they're supposedly losing, some of these paper losses, such as pre-funding retirement, you take some of that out there, they're actually quite a bit better than what that shows.
Yes, there's a different address format for Canada, but there's postal software that's available. The post office has information on Postal Pro that shows just what the international format needs to look like in order to provide best practice guidance in terms of what the address format should look like. Again, if you speak with anyone regarding international mail, there's just different software out there that's able to run address correction. There's NCOA options as well. It's just a matter of finding the right resources. And the majority of the international mail that I do here in the area is Canada because of our proximity. It's almost thought of as domestic mail because we're a stone's throw from the border.
Okay. Pat, come back to you. In working with the political mail, and you receive a lot of checks and such, what are the ways that people can help speed their mail through by being able to, what needs to be on their postal checks, and how is the best way to pay for some of these mailings that the election officials are trying to do?
That's every year we start working with candidates, and the smaller candidates will come in and they'll come in and try paying with postal checks that are their starter checks. And if you can get ahead of your client, first time you speak with them, start talking to them about how you pay for postage. You know, is it a mail order, or a money order, credit card, checks? But time and time again, we'll see where they'll come in with the starter checks that don't have their name or campaign embossed on the check, and it's last minute. They're trying to get their mail in. It's a rush. There's a deadline for AVs. Speaking with your clients ahead of time, letting them know what's a valid payment, and that would be a check that's embossed with, it can be a personal check, or company check, or a campaign check. They can pay with credit cards. Typically, a mail house will take the credit card. Oftentimes, they'll hold it till the credit card clears, and they will always associate a banking fee with that postage. So figure 3.5% more to pay with a credit card, just because the mail house is going to absorb that loss through the banking fees if they don't. But at time and time again, last minute, if you don't get ahead of with your client, they'll bring in these checks, or they'll bring in credit cards, or they'll have people calling in last minute with credit cards. I want to throw $1,000 into this campaign. Again, it's just training your client ahead of time. From the salespeople, is talking to your campaigns when you're talking to them, letting them know what's actually how it's going to work. We'll save a lot of headaches at the end.
So the post office doesn't like starter checks?
Hates them. Loves money orders.
Okay. We'll go back to Mr. Yost here. If a mailer needs help in working with the Business Gateway, what are some of the ways they can learn to use it?
Call Paul Brotz. No, just kidding. Your best line is to, first of all, contact Sean at the Business Mail Entry Unit, the manager there. She can point you someplace. The best resource, though, is sitting right here in this room as far as networking with PCC individuals. They will be able to guide you through the process, potentially. Users learn things from each other. And actually, one of the best ways to learn it is actually just get in there and click around. You can't break it. You can't break it. So if there's so many different things to click on, if we want to do something with informed visibility, use that data. So how many people in here are full service mailers? Okay. You have to make sure you meet the thresholds as far as the mail quality metrics every month. Do you know where you can find information, let's say when you go into seamless acceptance on undocumented pieces, as far as use informed visibility to get all of your information back for undocumented pieces? So all of that data is in there, and you just dig around there and click and find it. That's the best way to learn it, really. At least that's what I found. I mean, I remember working with the Business Customer Gateway from its inception through a work group at MTech, and Tracy might have even been involved with that when we all signed up, and the whole process back in those days, it was fun, let's just put it that way. It's gotten a lot easier to use. There are still some challenges, but the Postal Service is doing a very good job of listening to the industry and working with the industry to make things more user-friendly. But there might even be some tutorials. Actually, I know the National Association of Pre-Sort Mailers has YouTube. They're posting YouTube videos out there now on how to use the Business Customer Gateway. So that's one of the things. Not only is the Postal Service, PCCs, other associations are providing additional information to the public to get out there and learn how to use this application, because there is so much information out there and so many uses that the Business Customer Gateway handles. So look on YouTube, you'll see videos out there on how to log in, how to create a mailer ID, how to do all of these different functions that you can do on the Business Customer Gateway.
Okay. Thanks. So we're going to push forward. So now you're perfect on the business gateway, you're full service mailer, everything's running great, and now the post office brings up Seamless.
Okay.
So we're going to hand the mic over to one of the forefathers of Seamless.
Yeah.
And Seamless Acceptance looks to help mailers process mail, but what are some of the major challenges that mailers face in going seamless?
Well, I think the first thing people need to do is, the post office is working to get people mandatory within 2020. So you need to get started, get on the gateway, start looking at the reports and seeing where you're at. And it really, there's so much information you can learn about it and, talk to people. There are consultants out there. NAPM is offering, scorecard free, some free, checkups and tell you what this means and how to get there. But I think the biggest thing is don't be afraid of Seamless. I think it's actually going to be good. It was, my company, when we did it almost 8-9 years ago, it was, very new and hard, but the post office worked with us and it made us a better mailer. You can see so much information of how you're doing the mail. You'll learn all the stuff of what you're doing right and wrong, and sometimes you'll find out what the post office is doing right and wrong, and it just is a lot of information out there, and it's a good program. It really was.
What would you say is the biggest, concern for people wanting to go seamless? I mean, what's the biggest? I mean, you have to jump off that, ledge and then hope.
Well, everybody's concerned about undocumented because you could pay a large fine if you don't pay for everything. So you have the time to look every month, and you have a 0.3% tolerance, but that you really should be paying for every piece of mail too. So you need to look at the reports and find a system where you can verify, did I get that piece? A lot of times people are surprised that they're sending out mail with a barcode on it and no mail documentation. So you just need to make sure everything matches up, and down the road it should all work out pretty good.
Okay.
Along those lines, what Tracy's talking about, the undocumented, we all know that mistakes happen in our shops, right? So if we know that a mailing got submitted and the barcodes were not part of the electronic documentation or part of the mail.dat file, there's also what's called an undocumented log sheet that you should keep as a mail service provider or as a mailer to say, I know that these barcodes were not, the different range of barcodes were printed on the piece compared to what I submitted electronically. Or if you know certain barcode ranges that didn't make it into the e-doc, and they'll tell you that in the whole onboarding process of Seamless about keeping a log, an undocumented, what they call a known undocumented log sheet, because that is, I think, the biggest fear of people for jumping off into Seamless, is that potential invoice for undocumented pieces.
We have a question.
All right. Hi. So you talk a lot about this IMB barcode and undocumented. Can you explain how is that barcode generated, and then what information in that is correlated back to show something is undocumented?
So what happens is whenever the post office on their sorter sees an IMB, intelligent mail barcode, it goes back and tries to match documentation from 45 days past, looking to see is there any electronic documentation that proves that piece is paid for. So if you see an IMB and they don't see that it was paid for anywhere, they mark it as undocumented.
Does that give you what you're looking for? All right, thumbs up. Okay. Okay, we have a question from our expert on political mail.
What's the threshold
For undocumented?
Well, they've talked about going to 0, but I think the industry's been pretty successful, because that was several years, at keeping it about 0.3%. And I think that's pretty reasonable, believe it or not. You know, it was at once at 0.8 and then to 5, so it's been for a couple of years at 0.3. So that's 0.3%. So 99.7% of your mail.
Well, one of the things, and Tracy's absolutely right, it's 0.3, I think it is, right? Now, they want the threshold actually to be 0. We know that that's not possible. The Postal Service understands and recognizes it's not possible, because we know that there's what they call variability, or what they call noise. So actually, if you're going into seamless in the Postal Service, Business Mailer Support will work through this. Even though the threshold is 0.3, and you will not be assessed unless you eclipse that 0.3, the guide to Intelligent Mail actually says 0.1 is what the threshold is, but they're not going to assess you until you reach the 0.3. So if you are between that 0.1 and that 0.3, the Postal Service actually wants you to explain what that difference is, what that variability between 0.1 and 0.3 is. And if you can't explain what that difference is, they're going to make the assumption that those pieces weren't paid for. And even though you didn't exceed the threshold of 0.3, they could invoice you for that difference between the 0.1 and 0.3. Have you seen that in some of your other sites?
So if I'm doing this and I'm having troubles, you know, qualifying my mail, or I'm having these undocumented issues or reject issues, you know, what are some of the tricks that, or I shouldn't say the tricks, but what are some of the things that mailers can do to help, you know, lower that, to make sure that they're not running into that, other than, you know, it's difficult, you know.
The biggest thing you need to have is a record of all your mail submitted in mail.data in some kind of, you know, database that you can access to compare it to what the post office sends you that says you're missing these pieces. And then you can see that you got them or not. Because sometimes those pieces actually were paid for, and the post office didn't attribute it because it was returned to sender as part of that noise. And PARS, right, that changes the actual last part of the address. That originally was a big problem, was that the barcode would get changed a little bit when the address changed. So if you have a database that you know what you mailed and can prove it, you know, you can go back to the post office and say, well, it's not really our fault. These pieces are really here.
Okay, so there's a lot of protections, and maybe somewhat of the myth that's going on that the seamless is difficult to do isn't as difficult as everyone's making it sound out to be.
You know, as soon as you get control of making sure that you're paying for every piece and that submitting everything, where I think people have a problem is if they're in the middle of going to generate this mail and send it out as a mailing for pre-sort, they run out of time and say, well, I'm going to send it out full rate, so they don't generate a mail.dat, and all of a sudden give it to the post office. The post office sees the piece and doesn't see a mail.dat for that. So those last minute changes are a problem for it.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? If not, we'll start moving to lunch, and we will convene after lunch with the postal panel. So we'd like to thank you. If anyone wants any information from the 4 gentlemen up here, they'll be here for a little while later this afternoon, and they're all willing to talk and go over any issues that you may have with regards to the post office from the industry side, not necessarily from, you know, what the post office is bringing. They have their perspective, and the reason we did this is so that you can just hear kind of those comments versus, you know, the straight, you know, this is what the DMM says. So we'd like to say thank you to the panel, and have a great rest of the day.
One more time, let's give it up for our host, Mr. Paul Brotz, and our executive panel.